Thanks, Harriet. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 2024 Charles Sturt Learning and Teaching Conference we call Charles Sturt EdX. This year, our theme is Radical Reimagination, Rethinking Learning, Teaching and Student Engagement for Regional Universities. I would like to thank you all for being here, and a special thanks to our regional university network colleagues who are joining us from across the sector. So welcome to our conference today. Just to let you know, we're recording our session. The recordings will be made available on our conference website after the conference has closed. Let's move to an acknowledgement of country. We pay respect to First Nations elders, past, present and emerging, across the many lands where Charles Sturt University campuses, students and staff are located. In particular, we acknowledge the Wiradjuri, Ngunnawal, Gundungurra and Biripi peoples. We also pay respect to any First Nations colleagues at our conference today. So with that, it is my great pleasure to hand over to our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Renée Leon, who will open our conference today. Over to you, Renée.
Thank you, Janelle, and I too share in the acknowledgement of country. I'm in Bathurst on Wiradjuri country and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. It is really my pleasure to welcome you all to the 2024 Charles Sturt University EdX Learning and Teaching Conference. This annual event is one of the highlights of our academic calendar at Charles Sturt University. I'd like to extend a welcome to our special guests and keynote speakers, Professor Paul Harpur, OAM from the University of Queensland, Distinguished Professor Sarah O'Shea from Charles Sturt University, Professor Maria Raciti from the University of the Sunshine Coast, and Alec Webb, Chief Executive Officer, Regional Universities Network. And I am also pleased to welcome the learning and teaching professionals from fellow member institutions of the Regional Universities Network. As representatives of the nation's regional universities, we understand the unique and vital role that our institutions play, not only within our local communities, but also on a national and global scale. Advancing knowledge and innovation through education and research is the core purpose of universities, but it's regional universities that lead in delivering research with regional and global impact and broadening educational outcomes across our community, transforming graduates into people who succeed, lead, innovate, and contribute meaningfully to communities in our regions and around the world. This conference is a powerful reminder of our shared values and purpose. It provides an opportunity for the diverse learning and teaching community within the Regional Universities Network to come together, engage in cross-disciplinary knowledge exchange, and foster collaboration and innovation. Charles Sturt University is proud to share this experience with you all, offering a platform to showcase and celebrate learning and teaching with those equally committed to the transformative power of regional education and research. The theme for this year's Charles Sturt EdX, Radical Reimagination, Rethinking Learning, Teaching and Student Engagement for Regional Universities, was inspired by Charles Sturt's education strategy vision and the Australian Universities Accord. Three overarching themes underpin our vision: inspire students, empower communities, and be exceptional. Much like the Universities Accord, our vision has a strong focus on driving positive outcomes for regional Australia, promoting equity and accessibility in higher education, and enhancing the employability and career success of our graduates. Our vision seeks to radically reimagine the way we deliver learning and teaching to address the needs of modern regional Australia, while underscoring our responsibility beyond the regions. It commits us to delivering inclusive, adaptive and vibrant educational experiences for all, regardless of background or geographic location, and to continuously adapt to the needs and expectations of today and tomorrow. The necessity for universities to continuously adapt has never been more apparent or more critical. Over the past few years, society and the higher education sector have experienced unprecedented change, changes that have not only impacted our revenue streams, but have transformed our approaches to learning and teaching. The surge in online learning driven by COVID-19, the rising demand for diverse and short-form qualifications, and the rapid spread of generative artificial intelligence technologies and software have introduced a myriad of new challenges and opportunities. This rapid pace of change extends beyond higher education, affecting many industries and professions that we prepare our students to enter. Navigating these challenges.
Working when it hasn't started.
Sorry, someone trying to say something? Never mind. Navigating these challenges and opportunities has necessitated a radical reimagining of our ways of working to both address immediate needs and strategically plan for the future. And today, our institutions gather not just to discuss the future of learning and teaching in higher education, but to shape it. This conference has several objectives, but a key focus is supporting academic development. Your professional development is crucial for ensuring that our universities and our students are set up for success in today's complex and changing world. At Charles Sturt, with the contributions of the learning and teaching community here with us today, we're making strides in enhancing and advancing learning and teaching to manifest our vision, adapting and reimagining our approach to meet the needs of our students, communities, industries, and the sector now and into the future. This year marked a new era in learning and teaching at Charles Sturt with the launch of our new learning management system, Brightspace. Our students have praised its user-friendly interface, visual appeal, content layout, and accessibility features. Transitioning to Brightspace was a significant undertaking for Charles Sturt, achieved through the combined efforts of many university teams. This teamwork ensured the transition was completed ahead of schedule and was as smooth as it could be for our staff and students. And I'd especially like to recognise the staff in this room for your instrumental role in ensuring our students had an exceptional learning experience from the very start. Who says change has to be hard? Technology is transforming education, and as educators, we must harness its power to enhance the educational experience for our students. This is the focus of the conference's masterclass, which explores the power of Gen AI in enhancing real-world learning experiences in nursing and pharmacology education. And however, the content is adaptable to any discipline. I encourage you all to attend this class facilitated by Greg Higgins, who recently joined Charles Sturt as the Director of the Digital Learning and Teaching Precinct. With generative AI, we can reimagine our approaches to education. Equally important is navigating the challenges it presents, especially in terms of maintaining academic standards, a commitment we all share and our students deserve. Just as all students, regardless of their background or location, deserve the opportunity to access higher education. This year, Charles Sturt celebrated the opening of our Sydney campus, and we're now preparing to open our Melbourne campus in 2025. These campuses will offer both domestic and international students the opportunity to live and learn in a metropolitan city, as well as the option for those students to undertake a regional study experience. This approach reflects our vision to connect internationally and support education access across the board while balancing our commitment to the regions. We're growing the number of international students on our regional campuses by investing in their experience and offerings. This year, we began offering our nursing course in Dubbo for international students, attracting local residents eager to advance their regional health careers as well. At Charles Sturt, we're also investing in micro-credentials and short courses to meet evolving skill demands. By collaborating with industry partners and leveraging the expertise of our academics, we've launched short-form offerings in areas such as radiation safety and universal design for learning. This year, we've implemented a quick-to-market sprint process inspired by the Google Venture Sprint process. This enables us to develop and launch new courses in just 8 weeks. Examples already in market include a suite of nuclear science micros and courses for upskilling Australia's primary and secondary teachers. A significant challenge impacting regional students that we've made progress in addressing is work-integrated learning. Regional students often face more difficulties completing work-integrated learning than their metropolitan counterparts. While the government's planned paid placement program for nursing, teaching and social work students is a positive step, it's the people in this room who are developing innovative and creative solutions to address WIL placement challenges and support our students. For example, the Charles Sturt Social Impact Project connects students completing a work-integrated learning subject with local organisations, industry experts, and community representatives to address social justice issues. Instead of completing traditional placements, students engage in co-design sprints and collaborative projects. This approach has seen students collaborate with organisations including Headspace and the Black Dog Institute to create a mental health support module in Brightspace for students at Charles Sturt. Another project involves students teaming up with IBM, Leica Pet Food and Wild Mountains to organise a campus tree planting day and install plaques around the campus to highlight the importance of mental health breakout spaces in nature. The driving force behind all these achievements and ideas is our academics, those who educate the next generation of professionals and develop initiatives and research that solve problems and help our regions prosper. This conference is an opportunity for you to learn more about the impressive work and accomplishments across the RUN network and apply these learnings to enhance your practice. Uplifting and maintaining an exceptional academic workforce are the cornerstones of our education strategy vision. At Charles Sturt, we're committed to investing in the development of our educators and ensuring they are well supported to inspire and empower our students to learn and be innovative and exceptional in how they teach. This is why we created the Charles Sturt Teaching Academy, the force behind this conference. The Academy exists to add value to our learning and teaching community and our university, whether that be through opportunities to build capability, connect our vibrant community in learning and teaching, or enhance the profile of our people and institution by sharing their work and accomplishments. On that note, I would like to take a moment to celebrate just a few of the exceptional educators that are in the room with us today. I'd like to begin by congratulating the winners and finalists of the 2024 RUN Learning and Teaching Awards. This year's awards showcase the phenomenal efforts of Australia's regional universities towards improving outcomes for both equity cohorts and the regions. The University of Southern Queensland received both first and third place this year. Their NPILF Industry Projects team was awarded first place for their initiative, a virtual WIL model built for the regions. And Jessica Elliott of USQ was awarded third place for her initiative, Keeping Locals Local, Empowering Rural Healthcare with the UniSQ Charlesville Nursing. Congratulations to our UniSQ colleagues. I'm proud to share that Charles Sturt University secured second place. Congratulations to Dr. Belinda Downey and her team, who were recognised for their initiative, boosting retention through equitable assessments in early childhood education. And I hope Belinda and her colleagues have also been enjoying the wonderful early childhood education conference that's been occurring on Charles Sturt and online yesterday and today. There are a few more academics at Charles Sturt that I would like to recognise today. I'd like to congratulate Letitia Kernahan, Dr. Elise Green, and the team from the Three Rivers Department of Rural Health for receiving a 2024 Advanced Higher Education Global Impact Grant for their case study on using a community mental health experience program to connect health students with experts by experience, as well as congratulating the newest Higher Education Academy Fellows. Receiving this international fellowship recognises your commitment to teaching and learning and your standing as a higher education practitioner. This year, Charles Sturt was proud to have 5 senior fellows and 3 fellows appointed. Each of these accomplishments offers a glimpse into the exceptional teaching and learning within Australia's regional universities. And each of you here today is shaping the future through your teaching. Thank you to everyone for joining us here today. I'd like to especially thank Charles Sturt's Division of Learning and Teaching, and particularly the Teaching Academy, for organising such an informative, insightful and comprehensive conference. Next, you'll hear our esteemed keynote panel delve into and critically examine this year's theme, Radical Reimagination, exploring what it means for regional universities to radically reimagine their roles and futures. Following this, you'll have the opportunity to choose from more than 40 presentations, each focusing on various facets of learning and teaching. The collective talent at this conference highlights the diversity in who we are and what we do in learning and teaching, as well as our shared commitment to high-quality education. Take this opportunity to connect with, share, and learn from each other. While we're connected by our shared goals, each of our institutions is unique and has a diverse teaching workforce with many insights and experiences to share. As we look to the future, I look forward to further opportunities for our institutions to connect and collaborate. The success of all our universities has a profound effect, helping regional students achieve their higher education and career aspirations while boosting regional productivity, innovation, and economic development. But the ability of regional universities to achieve this relies on you, our dedicated learning and teaching professionals and researchers. Continue embracing opportunities like this conference to enhance your professional development. Adapt your practice by embracing technological advancements and innovative teaching methodologies to facilitate the best learning experiences. Stay at the forefront of your disciplines to ensure your students are work-ready, the subjects and courses you teach meet industry needs, and the research you deliver remains impactful. I wish you all a productive and rewarding conference, and I look forward to seeing the incredible impact and work that our institutions will produce in the years to come. Thank you. Back to you, Janelle.
Thank you, Renée, for opening our conference. We're very grateful for you to do that today. It's my pleasure now to hand over to Professor Graham Brown, our Provost and DVC academic, to chair our keynote panel. Over to you, Graham.
Thank you, Janelle, and thanks everyone for joining this exciting day. I'd just like to add my acknowledgement of country. I am in Perth today on Whadjuk Noongar land, so I pay my respects to elders past, present of the Whadjuk Noongar Nation. And my job now is to really corral our group of amazing speakers we've got this morning into a really, hopefully, provocative and interesting session on what we mean by radical reimagination. And so we've got 4 really great speakers to do that provocation, and then we'll have some time for discussion at the end. So without further ado, I will move on to introduce our first speaker. If you have questions that occur to you during the presentations, please do use the Q&A function to put your questions, and we will make sure we address those at the end of the session. The provocation that our speakers have been asked to speak to is, what does radical imagination look like from your perspective, and why is it important to radically reimagine in this way? And our first speaker to give us that vision for 10 minutes is Paul Harpur. Professor Paul Harpur is Professor of Law at the University of Queensland and an advocate for disability inclusion in higher education. A Paralympian and 2022 Blind Australian of the Year, he leads national and international projects such as the Universitas 21 Disability Inclusion Policy Mapping Initiative, and his work focuses on transforming universities into disability champions. And in that function, he serves on the Universities Accord Ministerial Reference Group. Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much, and hard act to follow a Vice-Chancellor, but I'll do my best. We were asked what radical reimagination might look and feel like in our area of expertise of work as it applies to the conference theme and for regional universities. Now, I can see by the numbers here, this is an exciting topic, and I'm excited to be here and respond to this provocation. So in this 10 minutes, I'm going to be provocative myself, and I'm going to ask or put to you guys that we do need a radical change in higher education. I want to argue for the universally designed university, a university that is designed for all students, a university which would actually be cheaper, as you don't have to constantly create workarounds and have staff to help make those workarounds. And that also university that would then be more inclusive of all our students, not just some. And I believe the universally designed university, it's a decision we need to make. And I'm going to go for 5 key reasons now. It's a bit weird to put my hand up in front like that and there's a video, but 5 reasons. Now first, inclusivity. Now, universal design, it's a concept that has deep roots in the disability community, and the idea is that universal design of teaching, you've heard the Vice-Chancellor just reference that. The idea is that universal design of teaching is that educational environments are accessible to all students, including those with disabilities. This promotes a more inclusive and equitable experience. So the thing is, we've been talking about inclusion for years, but think on this. We are looking now at more than 1 in 10. The Disability Universities Accord discussion paper said 9%. Some universities have over 12. Self-identification is increasing. We have over about 20% of the population with a disability. Huge emphasis on increasing older workers coming into the sector and other non-traditional students. So we have a large cohort here who are not your traditional student. And where I come from at UQ, that's often has been the inner city rich kid, not as bad as some unis. But the thing is, if you think about diverse learning approaches, there's a lot of students with issues. So thinking about that, I mean, if you factor in all the diversity groups and add them up, you might even get the majority of students. Particularly if you go, first in family, parents who want to work, people working want to work remote. The thing is, why are we building systems that does not factor in all our students? And that could be expensive, but also there are effective means that can be adopted, which will do it efficiently, effectively, and create change and push the problem to someone else. For example, procurement. I mean, it's in the CRPD, it's proposed, a number of universities do it. Some do it better than others, but procurement, we do it for safety. We don't purchase a machine. And say, gee, I wonder that safe and's going to kill someone. When we purchase it under work health and safety laws, there's a requirement that it's safe. So why don't we push it to the suppliers and say, hey, look, we're buying this Workday from you, or this ebook platform, or this lift. We want it universally designed. And if the supplier says, what does that mean? You say, well, you're the idiot that's designing it. Haven't you designed it for everyone that's going to use it? Well, if you haven't, maybe we'll go somewhere else. And that makes a difference because you're the purchaser, particularly if all universities do it. Now, but also if you're going to have it in the contract, I suggest you use it. Like, as in, if suppliers lie or suppliers suddenly do a bait and switch and the bid is great and what you get is crap, sue them. I'm a lawyer. Maybe that's a legal approach, but nice little happy demand letter saying, gee, we're paying you $100,000 a year. You're failing. We're not paying until you fix it. And if just push back and see what happens. Now, so that's our buying power. Now I'm better move on. So to my next point, it enhances learning. So if you accommodate diverse learning styles, you don't just benefit as a minority, that's benefiting everyone. Now, it allows all students to engage in the material that in a way that best suits them. That means all. Now, sure, it's important for people with disabilities, but why are we not just thinking including all Australians? Make it open to everyone possible. Now, a good example of a technique is every time we get an upgrade forced on us, it seems to be bigger and better, and it requires a new computer, expensive, and it requires bandwidth. Now, bandwidth is not always good for these is not always good for people with disabilities. A number of them come from socioeconomically disadvantaged area, but relevant to run regional university network, something which takes a long time to download, it's a pain in the butt. Today I'd been planned on actually about an hour and a half from my city in Brisbane, and out sort of the country, but then that fell over because of various matters. But I'd rang the place and said, "What's your internet like?" Oh, some days it's 1, 2 bars. Sometimes you have to use a telephone. I mean, my mobile. No. You come up and there's a landline. And so I went, right. So no video, no Zoom. So I mean, imagine a student up there trying to download just simple PowerPoints, and the lecturer has uploaded, 20 gig, huge. Just click on this download, and it takes 10 minutes to download everything. Why? So why can't we have low text solutions? Now, third point is that it's innovative. So these ideas of teaching methods, getting it inclusive, creates innovations. Now, you've probably heard about text messages. I'm trying to break my phone, but that's going to work. My iPhone, text messages, that was for the deaf. Optical characters recognition, which we use. In fact, there's probably a transcript appearing as I speak. That sort of stuff. A lot of that was created for people with disabilities originally, and it's obviously useful for everyone. Now, but even just at a smaller level that we do, teaching around or giving feedback to people who are neurodiverse. So when you communicate feedback to someone who's neurodiverse, you've got to be, well, it depends on, you always should ask how they like it. That's the easier way. But either way, you've got to be clearer and really so direct. So you don't want to use vague language or excessive metaphors. Or if you've got ADHD, yes, you want to get to the point quickly or you'll lose the person. So, really actionable recommendations. Now, isn't that better for everyone? Like getting good feedback in a way that you can use it quickly. So, like I'd like someone saying wishy-washy around the point, you don't even know if you're really getting feedback, versus someone who comes up to you and says, "I'd like to talk to you about your recent project. We asked you to get the report to us by 5 p.m. Friday. Yeah, it was submitted by Monday morning." Now that's outside the rules, and it's unfair on other students. And so that's really clear why it's a problem. Why? Now, community and belonging. Now, a university that is not universally designed, it's not designed for everyone. That means when you walk in that front door or digitally in the door, if that university is not universally designed, then that university is sending a message to you that university is telling you you aren't welcome. You see this with the gender studies around the messaging, Indigenous, you see that with the messaging. Well, it's the same with disability. It tells us that the university is not for us, it's for someone else. Think about this. If a student's first experience with our university is, sorry, you'll have to make an appointment with our disability services office to help accommodate your needs. Oh, sorry, you're also going to have to go online and can you upload medical evidence? No, you don't have it. Sorry. Could you get a doctor's report? I know it's going to cost you $3,000, but no, sorry, we can't pay for that. You got to pay for it. Yes, it's got to be in a stupid form because someone's created a form. Yes, I know the doctor's not going to like filling out. Sorry. And it goes on and on. And sorry, after all of this, you may still not have an equal experience. The thing is you're different. And it's like, that's the reason. Oh, sorry, this is really hard. And then of course the student's sitting there going, I know for a fact that your first student with a disability passed this campus before I was born. It's not a surprise that there's going to be people with disabilities in wheelchairs, or, I mean, look at Louise Savage, 2000. Everyone remembers her in the Paralympics, right? Well, you know, she went to uni. Angie Ballard was another one that, I mean, I'm a Paralympian, that's why I know. Anyway, but the point is, it's not a shock that 24 years after Sydney Paralympics, we're going to have people with disabilities in our campus. Yet often we design things as like, oh my God, there's someone with a disability. So from the days the doors open, we've just decided that we're not real sure how to go about it. But days like today give us a chance to fix these things. You see, we don't really want to be waiting till next year when the National Student Ombudsman kicks off and can take complaints from students who are unhappy. Because if you go 9% of the student population, 1.6 million students in Australia, that's 144,000 students with disabilities in Australia, all having potentially not fantastic experiences. How many of them might lodge a complaint and get it and with the ombudsman? So we need to be thinking how to deal with those issues on the risk register now, but also thinking front foot, what can we do? What can we do? Well, let's look at this and say we have the smartest people in the country in our campuses. We've got the smartest students, the smartest professors, academics, administrators. We are the innovators. We are the researchers. We are the experts in this country. We don't design COVID, actually. We designed cancer. We designed cures, vaccines for COVID. We've designed rocket fuels. We've got all the genomes, all these amazing things. We have the resources in our campuses to create workable solutions that will lead us to a more inclusive world. I think we should harness our expertise and start changing the world. And that's my message. I think we need to flip how we think about students, and obviously staff as well, but particularly students, and go, students are different. We need to think different. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. That's really laid down a challenge to us all, I think, and hopefully our subsequent speakers are going to add to that challenge, and then we'll work out how to deliver collectively. So moving on then to our next speaker, our very own Sarah O'Shea. Professor O'Shea is an award-winning educator and internationally recognized researcher in higher education equity. She has over 30 years of experience in the sector, leading national projects on underrepresented student success. She's currently an Australian Learning and Teaching Fellow, a Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy, and a Churchill Fellow, and is also our Dean of Graduate Research. So thank you very much for joining us, Sarah, and over to you for 10 minutes to share your vision and challenge for radical reimagination.
Well, thank you, Graham. And Paul said it was difficult coming after the Vice-Chancellor. Well, I've got an equally difficult role coming after Paul. So thank you, Paul, for your universally designed university. I thought that was brilliant. Thank you also for inviting me to consider this idea of radical reimagination with a particular focus on the regional university setting. And particularly how our regionality can be a catalyst for this reimagined higher education sector. So what does radical reimagination mean from my perspective? I've got sort of three main points. My first one is I would love it if we could radically reimagine. I will be saying that word, which is quite a tongue twister, I have to say. Radically reimagine how we define student equity groups and classifications. We have 6 equity groups at the moment, you know, students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, students with disability, as Paul has indicated, rural, regional, remote students, women in non-traditional areas, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander students, and also students who have a background other than English. But all these categories were sort of developed and defined in the 1990s. And for those of us who remember 1990, I do, aside from really big haircuts and even bigger shoulders, you know, the World Wide Web had just been invented. We were all still using floppy disks. And times have changed drastically since then. And I think it's really important to get this right, because how we define equity is actually then influences how we do equity. As someone who researches in this field, you know, I sometimes feel the current categories are a bit like having one of those old-fashioned Kodak cameras, but trying to operate in an Instagram world. And I think Paul's point his talk indicates that, you know, students with disability are a highly diverse group, and trying to amalgamate that population into one definition is problematic. At the same time, I would also really like us to radically reimagine how we collect data on our equity groups. Approximately 50% of our equity-bearing students fall into more than one equity group, but we've no national approach to collecting this data or capturing the diversity. We all know that understanding the ways in which students are intersected by different equity categories is key to how we improve academic outcomes. But this complexity of belonging to multiple equity groups really needs to be unpacked so we can understand how it impacts across the student life cycle. As a regional university, like others, our student cohort is inherently diverse. And we really do need to continue to champion that diversity and to showcase what this means at an individual learner level. I feel very strongly that we embrace this diversity as a strength, not a deficit. But we need to embed equity into every decision we make. And this really reflects Paul's point about this universally designed university. It should never be an afterthought, but our first thought. And I do feel that regional universities like Charles Sturt are uniquely placed to lead in the field of equity and inclusion, given this the demographics of our student populations and our unique connections with community. The second radical reimagination I'd like to mention is in terms of future-proofing our education system. I recently contributed to an article that argued that the traditional lecture is well and truly dead. Indeed, if we think about teaching and learning over the last 4 years, we all know the significant changes that have been made. In my spare time, I often read reports such as the recent EY Ernest Young report on the future of higher education, which actually suggests that by 2030, which is really only 6 years away, learning and gaining qualifications will be as convenient as shopping or banking. And they quote Ian Wright, who is the DVC of University of Canterbury, who says that learning may be streaming like Spotify with the experiential learning of a crowded house concert. Now, Ian might be reflecting his age there with the reference to the Crowded House Conference, but what he's trying to say is there will be a combination of convenience and rich learning that will include some online, some face-to-face, and also will or internships. In this future imagination or this future reimagination, the balance of power will shift from the learning provider to the learners. And universities will need to focus on student engagement and building a lifelong relationship with their students, understanding their needs and adapting accordingly. Their role as a career advisor and a guide through all the available learning options will also become really important. And again, this is where I think many regional universities like Charles Sturt are already headed. Unlike the group of eights or the more urban institutions, the idea of blended learning is not new to our regional universities, particularly Charles Sturt. And so really we have no need to dismantle existing systems or rethink ways of doing teaching and learning. Instead, we have the power to apply a whole range of existing work to manage what will be a very different learning landscape over the coming years. My final point relates to radical reimagination of the higher education experience for our rural and regional students. We know that country Australians are less than half as likely to gain a university degree by the age of 35 compared to urban counterparts. And regional universities like CSU often do the heavy lifting with very little additional funding when it comes to this student population. What we need is actually more place-based pathways that draw upon a diversity of educational providers working collaboratively to enable students to stay local if they wish. And again, to me, this is a strength of the regional university setting, as universities like Charles Sturt have developed enduring and mutually beneficial relationships that span locations and industries and disciplines. We are actually ideally placed to create a community-based and learner-centric experience that would avoid implicitly devaluing the local or the regional. To achieve this, though, we do need to proactively embrace local knowledges and place-based learnings, foregrounding the relationality of learning, and in that way, learning from our First Nations colleagues as we move forward to a more inclusive and, I hope, radically reimagined higher education system. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Really, again, provocative, challenging presentation, to really adding to the radical nature of our emerging agenda over the course of but an hour. So let's move on now to our third speaker, Alec Webb. Welcome, Alec, and thank you for taking the time to come along. Alec is the Chief Executive Officer of the Regional Universities Network, of which we're a member, and in that role he is a strong advocate for the importance of regional higher education in Canberra and across the policy halls of government. With over 10 years of experience in higher education advocacy, public policy and leadership roles in Australia and in the UK, Alec holds multiple advanced degrees and champions the impact of regional universities. Alec, over to you for your provocation.
Thank you so much, Graham, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity for the Regional Universities Network, or RUN as we call it, to contribute to this conference and engage with the theme of radical reimagination. In many ways, reimagining what learning, teaching, student engagement, and research should look like in a regional context is precisely what RUN is set up to do. RUN looks at the broader higher education policy landscape of the day, and in consultation with our university members, we identify aspects of policy that are not serving regional contexts well enough, or we identify those that could serve regional contexts more effectively. We then set about imagining a more effective policy response, articulated in an evidence-based way, and then we set about advocating for it. Sometimes we are successful in achieving positive changes to policy frameworks that result in more favourable operating environments for regional students and regional universities. These successes allow our members to do what they do best. Sometimes we are unsuccessful in achieving that change, but we at least succeed in challenging the often metrocentric gaze of decision makers in the sector. And sometimes we feel that we're just yelling into the great abyss to no effect at all. Thankfully, that rarely happens. But the process of imagining a better, fairer, more equitable and more sustainable higher education system for regional Australians is what, along with my wife kicking me out of bed to get her coffee, is what gets me up every morning. So if I may, I'd like to float some radical thoughts about a reimagined higher education sector. These thoughts will drive hopefully more positive outcomes for regional Australians and the universities that they rely upon. So imagine if the working age population outside of our capital cities had the same level of tertiary attainment as that found within our capital cities. It is unfortunately approximately half. But imagine if we could achieve that. What magnitude of social and economic potential might that unlock? Imagine if, when a student accepts a place in an Australian university, regardless of whether they are studying in Melbourne or Sydney, Armidale, Bundaberg or Dubbo, they are met with a comparable and equitably funded standard of tertiary infrastructure and facilities, comparable choice of courses, and equally funded support services and resources. And imagine if that same student, regardless of where they choose to study, had roughly the same opportunities to progress into research and research training without their regionality acting as a barrier. And then imagine if regional Australia enjoyed the same levels of research-trained workforces as metropolitan Australia, rather than the fractional share that we currently hold. Imagine if regional campus classrooms enjoyed the same level of shared global perspectives brought by international students as metropolitan campus classrooms. Imagine if we had a funding system that acknowledged that it costs more to aspire a student from an underrepresented background to study, and then acknowledged the real cost of supporting that student through to completion. Imagine if we had a system that funded the true cost of delivering comparable standards of tertiary education across multiple campuses in smaller, yet no less important regional populations. And imagine if talented students from low SES backgrounds were not prevented from becoming teachers, nurses, midwives, or social workers because of placement poverty. Imagine if the national impact, if large metropolitan universities shifted their exclusive enrolment gaze to take in more students from underrepresented backgrounds at the same rate that regional universities do. And imagine if metropolitan students began relocating to regional universities at the same rate that regional students have historically been relocating to the cities. This would be because they've finally realized they will enjoy a more personalized education, higher rates of graduate employment, and of course, higher starting salaries. In the interest of time, I'll stop my radical imagination voyage there. But in a highly developed and politically stable country like Australia, with a world-renowned university system that has a combined revenue of approximately $35 billion a year, you would think that the absence of tertiary inequities based upon a student's geography and social disadvantage would not be such a radical concept to imagine in 2024. Yet, here we are. Thankfully, though, there is a mood for change. And any solution starts with a clear acknowledgement of the problem. And that's what the Australian Universities Accord has attempted to do. The Accord articulated clearly that our ongoing economic prosperity relies upon a sustained growth in education and training attainment rates within working age populations. And the Accord set ambitious 2050 attainment targets accordingly. The Accord revealed that those attainment rate levels were already more or less at saturation point amongst the more traditional student cohorts, and that in isolation, this would still leave us short of the 2050 targets. So to recognize and reach those targets set out by the Accord, growth would need to come from traditionally underrepresented student cohorts, students living with a disability, those from low SES backgrounds, First Nations Australians, and those from regional Australia. These are student cohorts that regional universities have excelled in educating. The Accord did not just stop there, however. It identified the next layer of wicked problems, those persistent systemic barriers to participation and success among students from underrepresented backgrounds. And then it provided recommendations that sought to intervene in their persistence. It was validating to see reflected in the Accord's final report many of the issues and recommendations that RUN and its member universities had been advocating for years. Did the Accord capture every item of disadvantage and inequity facing regional students in their universities? Unfortunately, no. But did the Accord at least recommend a radical policy reimagination of those issues that it did raise? Alas, also no. But at least it got the ball rolling on what will become a slow tide of long overdue reform favouring regional Australians. Indeed, there is already early, modest movement on some of my imagination musings that I opened with placement poverty, needs-based funding, managed growth for equity cohorts, with legislation either before the Parliament or having undergone a first stage of sectoral consultation. It is my hope that we'll see momentum gather pace once the Accord's recommended Australian Tertiary Education Commission, or ATEC, is established. The ATEC will be the body that takes ownership of those 2050 attainment targets and the university system that delivers upon them. I believe that regional universities like Charles Sturt have been extremely successful in setting those key pull factors that ensure aspiration, participation, and success of equity students. Think of the outreach programs that you employ, the enabling courses, your student support mechanisms, the teaching quality, the digital platforms, and physical campus facilities, and the world-class research that your university promotes to aspiring students. Over the coming years, we may finally see some stronger external push factors complementing these pull factors as the ATEC comes online and starts implementing things like needs-based funding. RUN has been highly active in the discussions around the shape and mandate of the ATEC, and I anticipate we will remain busy for years to come as we seek to shape the function and effectiveness of the ATEC in meeting attainment targets through equity participation. I think it is important that we radically imagine what an effective, equitable, and sustainable higher education system would look like, not only in regional Australia, but for regional Australians. We need to think about how we will go about achieving that, so I'm eager to hear more from the experts that are contained within this conference. I think it is clear so far after listening to my fellow panelists, we do not lack for imagination. We do not lack for a compelling ask. It's just up to us now to manifest our imaginings. And to do that, we just need to take action. Thanks.
Thank you, Alec. I think that was a really important and helpful addition to our narrative so far, reminding us not just of what we need to achieve, but also how we need to go about it, and the important context of RUN and the accord for achieving the kinds of imaginations that we are talking a lot about. So now moving on to introduce our final provocateur, Maria Raciti. Professor Raciti is an Aboriginal Australian and co-director of the UniSC Indigenous and Transcultural Research Centre. Her research focuses on Indigenous education and economic participation, along with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and Australia's Closing the Gap targets. Maria also serves on national and international committees as an expert advisor. Maria, over to you.
Thank you, Graham. And thank you for my previous panel members for creating such an inspiring and provocative discussion so far. So today I'm also going to be provocative, and I'm also advocating for First Nations Australians. So for me, and perhaps for you, radical reimagination conjures up many things. Radical reimagination for me can be casting a hopeful line into the future, or it can be a welcome distraction from the troubles of the present. It can be an indulgence, or it can be a necessary problem-solving tool. Whichever way you look at it, radical imagination involves looking at things differently, from the inside out, from the top to the bottom, both looking forwards to cultivate foresight, but also looking backwards to draw down on the lessons that have been learned in the past. I still haven't quite settled on whether radical reimagination is good or not so good. So here today, for me, it's both. It is a notion that has the ability to cast shadows, just as it has the ability to open doors. It is both a way forward and a way back. In the shadows, radical reimagination can be an exercise in impatience, in not recognizing the existing rich ecology of practices, principles, policies, and people that comprise Indigenous learning and teaching in Australia. It might also be seen as the downing of tools on promises made and that remain incomplete, such as the 2011 commitment to comprehensively embed Indigenous content in the curriculum, a project that is still not complete. And we do this in order to chase rainbows and shiny new learning and teaching ideas. Look, we can learn a lot from country. Country, in nature, there is a cycle, a life course from birth to growth to maturity to death. And everything follows this life course. There's no radical reimagination. On country, there's a recognition that all things are interconnected and that this interconnectivity is the foundation for both resilience and balance amongst all the other elements that form that ecology. And I see this as also the case for the learning and teaching ecology. Hence, a negative view of radical reimagination might be that the mass hothousing of speculative ideas about learning and teaching and then inserting them, sometimes with force, into an existing education ecology goes against this natural life course that we learn from country. Radical reimagination in learning and teaching can be an exercise in both mirrors and horizons. We look into mirrors to reflect on the world, on what we've done. We also look to the horizon to dream of faraway futures. So there's been a lot of talk lately about Indigenous futures, particularly these faraway futures beyond the horizons. To quote Australian Indigenous author Shawana Andrews, futures are stories that have not yet taken place. They are full of possibilities and they can free us. But when a lot of people are asked to imagine the faraway future of Indigenous students in 2050 and beyond, like many, I too am lost for words. Indeed, many of us, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, can't imagine different faraway futures from the current status quo. So why is this? Why has it become so hard to imagine bright and flourishing Indigenous futures? Perhaps it's because as Indigenous leaders, staff and students, we feel that if we lift our gaze to the future, it means we shift our energy from the pressing and real needs of the present. And these present day realities facing Indigenous students, they are many and varied and they require our immediate attention. While we do our best to focus on what is strong, not what is wrong, Indigenous students often remain immersed in deficit discourses that limit not only the way Indigenous students are perceived by others, but also how they perceive themselves. So I thought I'd look abroad, and maybe this is where radical hope can help. So radical hope is a concept drawn from the Native American Crow Nation, and it is the idea that we should always hold out hope for a faraway future that is not even yet conceivable. Radical hope emerges in moments when the future is highly uncertain. So you can imagine it resonates deeply with Indigenous communities around the globe, and particularly at this point in history. More than passive optimism, radical hope is about the active engagement in the construction of self-determined possible futures. Another concept that you may not be familiar with is the everywhen, and maybe understanding this will help us too. How time is constructed by Indigenous peoples plays a crucial role in envisioning these faraway futures. We live our past in the present because time is not considered linear, but rather cyclical and simultaneous. I was in a workshop last week where Professor Eileen Morton-Robinson shared the wisdom of her grandfather with us, in that Indigenous people, for Indigenous people, the past is in front of us and the future is behind us. That is because we can see the past. Known as the everywhen, it describes this experience of time, and it's different. So rather than radical reimagination, I'd like to propose that sustainability is a key or a countermeasure to the volatility that we experience in the present day. Now, history shows us in no uncertain terms that there has been a merry-go-round of one-off and short-lived endeavours regarding Indigenous students. And yet the problems of 30 years ago remain in the present. These endeavours haven't worked, perhaps because they were abandoned or unfunded too soon for the next shiny initiative. There was no sustained embedding, for example, of Indigenous content. So I'll end on a note that we're all in this together. We cannot move forward by willfully ignoring unfulfilled promises. Apathy, resistance, and inaction mean that we are yet to fully execute the now 13-year-old commitment to embedding Indigenous content in the curriculum. So maybe it's time to take off the rose-coloured glasses and drop the Pollyanna perspectives and simply roll up our sleeves and do what we said we would. My radically reimagined future for Indigenous learning and teaching is one that is void of empty platitudes. Empty platitudes don't enable hope. And everywhen perspectives mean that what we see in front of us is a trail of unfinished business. So let us too be bold, honest, and courageous. Let us too be change doers rather than path makers. Let us too focus on the sustainability of Indigenous learning and teaching initiatives. Let us too walk our talk and see the whole student arriving at our universities with baskets of cultural wealth, brimming with aspirations, fueled by our promises for a bright future. Let us keep Indigenous students in our line of sight and let us fulfil our promises to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for that fascinating and yeah, very provocative approach to radical reimagination. So we've now got plenty of time for Q&A. So please do put questions into the chat. But it's my job first to perhaps sort of pull out some of the themes that I've seen from those I've heard in those presentations, and to provide some perhaps challenge to our audience to think about as well, on top of what our presenters have given us. And what I've been struck listening to these presentations from very different perspectives is the I'm going to start from sort of Maria's provocation and work back. So what Maria's challenged us in one sense, I think, is that maybe radical reimagination is just getting on with what we promised to do and stopping, talking about, new. So while, you gave us this contrast between an idea of radical hope, the faraway futures, which is great in one sense, you've also challenged us to think about, well, let's actually just get on and deliver what we said we'd deliver anyway. And that was very much the theme of an op-ed I did in the Australian recently, saying, in essence, the accord was great. Can you now deliver it, please, government? So, that idea that actually radical reimagination could be, stop talking and start doing. And I think that was somewhat reflected in an interesting way in the work in what Paul, Sarah, and Alec talked to us about as well, in the sense that what Paul was talking about and challenging us to do is not in one sense new. Universal design for learning is a fairly well-established concept. I'm sure we can always make it better. He was just, again, challenging us to actually deliver that and to deliver it beyond particular individual categories, but to think about a comprehensive approach to that at the university level and think about how that works for everyone, whether disabled, whether from a low socioeconomic community, and think about how those kind of universal design principles could be brought into the whole university sector. What I thought was quite interesting and something that we may want to explore in questions and answers a bit is the individual versus the collective in this, because the role that Paul was very much asking us to play was, from my perspective, thinking about, let's just respond to each individual. Let's forget about whether they are blind, First Nations, low socioeconomic. Let's deliver what needs they have and deliver education in a way that they can access. But then Sarah was also reminding us, we need to actually be thinking about categories, and we need to be thinking, if only for tracking and monitoring our progress towards our outcomes, we need to understand and maybe even rethink the categories we use for, measuring socioeconomic disadvantage and things like that. So it's a sort of classic multicultural challenge, but it's one that seemed to be quite live in that discussion of how do we reconcile responding to the individual with the importance of data monitoring and categorization for seeing our progress. Those are my thoughts on where we sort of have got to, and then the achievability very much, Alec talking to us about, okay, sort of bringing us back around to those points that Maria finished with, saying, well, okay, what's the next steps here, right? So we can be radical reimagination, but what's the pragmatism? How are we going to get this done? The Accord has set a very clear agenda, one that, I think the government has failed to deliver on and has kicked into the long grass. A new government may well, just then, take a whippersnipper to that long grass and forget it altogether. So really, those next steps of delivering is something that I think really came through from both Maria and Alec. So those have been my musings on that. We don't seem to have any questions yet in our chat function. So I'm going to throw back to our panelists and say, have I completely bastardized you? Has that actually, given any grounds for perhaps responding to your different presenters? Perhaps we'll just go through in the order that we first spoke, and Paul, responses to other provocations.
Thank you for that. And I think Sarah's very right that we do need to make sure we collect the data, because if you don't count it, it doesn't count. Like, that's the ultimate. We don't know if we're doing well or doing good or we're doing bad unless we assess it. But also we need to when we're focused on every student, university, the power of AI is making that a lot easier. We used to have to spend hours and hours doing administrative tasks, which now you can just go click. So we should be designing things better, and we can assess it better using the technology that we've got. So I think that the situation we're at, also, I think we really need to think about the new expectations that students come. A good example with disability is the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities gave students a right to higher education. So it was the first time a human rights convention expressly recognized the right to higher education. So for the last 18 years, students have been babies, they have to keep told they've got a right to higher education. So there's an expectation gap between what students expect and what we're delivering. And that expectation gap is probably going to play out in some of the new regulatory models, regulatory responses coming out, like the Ombudsman.
Thanks, Paul. So I'll turn to other presenters to respond to their co-provocations. But we do have our first question pop up into the chat. So for the panel as a whole, Riley wants to ask, how do we achieve these great goals within the HE system constraints? I'm going to throw to you first, Alec, as the policy, most close perhaps to policy work. How do we achieve these kinds of goals within the current constraints?
Well, I think my answer here, Graham, will answer not only this question, but also your earlier question, which is there is a very strong political will in Canberra for regional universities to continue to do the amazing things which we do. But part of the key challenge of that is, and maybe it's because we're all honest to, the salt of the earth, good regional Australians, we get on doing the hard work, but we sometimes fail to articulate it and celebrate our monumental achievements and successes as part of this. And in reflecting through the period we've been over in the last 18 months with the Accord, one of the key things was the lack of awareness within Canberra and the public servant, and maybe in the political sphere as well, about just the amazing work that regional universities do. And so part of this is making the policymaker aware of the great things that we do and what could be achieved with that proper recognition in terms of funding and the appropriate regulatory settings. Now, one of the key challenges there is shifting that metro-centric gaze. We know at regional universities that, our students tend to be part-time. They're more likely to be mature age. They're not your traditional 18-year-old school cohort leaver. But that is unfortunately still the mindset which a lot of policymakers and politicians, when they think about what it is to be at university, that's what they think. So I think that there's an appetite and a recognition of change needs to occur in Australia's higher education policy settings. And we are kind of poised at the right place at the right time to tell that right message. We actually just need to reallocate some of that time that we have in so much abundance, I'm sure, to actually get about talking and celebrating our successes.
Thanks, Alec. And we've talked about optimism for the future and your optimism about the desire of Canberra to support universities and regional universities in particular is very welcome. But perhaps do any of our other panelists have thoughts about the higher education system constraints and how they stand in the way of achieving the kinds of goals we've talked about and what we might do to change that? Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the equity categorizations. I mean, I would align myself much closer to Paul in the sense that I think universally designed university is actually beneficial for all learners. But it sort of boils down to this dichotomy that universities have to exist in, where they're sort of expected to be both, drivers of economic growth, and equally sort of opening up equality and social justice. And I've noticed since COVID, there's been a lot more discussion and reflection around what is the purpose of higher education. And I think, the Accord was wonderful. It was a great review, but it did tend to cast that human capital sort of perspective over equity. I think the term of human relationship between learners and getting them into jobs was really the focus of the Accord. And I understand that that's sort of what government funders and Canberra probably understand, that's their perspective. But equally, we can't forget the deeply transformative potential of education, in particular higher education. And it becomes, very important, particularly now, because I feel we're on a bit of a cusp, that we really foreground, I think, it's been mentioned earlier that we really, Alex mentioned it, that we really foreground, the huge impact that attending university has on our learners, and that often can't just be measured in terms of jobs and economy and data. It actually requires an understanding of the lived experience of our learners. So I'm just adding to what's already been discussed.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think that's really helpful addition. And for me, raises that issue around how we think about universities, whether they purely serve a socioeconomic function or whether they have a more kind of transformative role for individuals and ultimately for society, is obviously a really critical one for us. And I absolutely agree with you that there is that we have across all coalition and Labour alike, started to kind of reduce universities to that kind of socioeconomic job market, delivering job skills function. One thing that I would challenge back, though, which I think is sometimes, I think we probably would all have colleagues who can be a little bit dismissive of students who come to university just because they want a job. And that sort of, I think I agree with you, but that sort of that transformative nature of education is not something that we can expect or demand from students. I think when they arrive at university, it's actually our job to inspire it in them. So I think part of, readdressing that issue is us moving away from, thinking about, oh, well, students are only here just because they want a job. They're not here for the love of learning. And actually saying, yeah, and that's an entirely valid reason to be at university. Indeed, it's probably the main reason, and I would argue historically always been the main reason for going to university, is getting the job that you want, and that it's our job then to make that experience more transformative for them than just sort of the skills collection in the way that the government sees it now.
Can I add in? I think when we talk a lot about the slashing and burning and all this criticism of universities, it also falls on the shoulders of those that are teaching in higher education. So if you're a high school teacher or a primary school teacher or an early childhood teacher, we always get told by the minute every politician's saying how wonderful you are, you're the best, you're changing lives. And when suddenly the student goes from one education institution to another, then suddenly they're at a university and we get told we seem to be in the sector that gets hammered. Yet we are teaching the students. We're doing the same role in a lot of people. And the staff, I don't think, get the support or protection sometimes that we need. And I think in this time, going back to your point about money, I mean, we've got job cuts everywhere. I mean, 100 universities closed down in the US or in higher education institutions, I think it was last year, like a lot of small ones. But the thing, a lot of institutions are struggling. So we make job cuts, but then that means if you're working 60 hours as an academic and you've got to pick up marketing help or something else, you've got 5 hours extra work. Now, what do? Well, you can't work anymore. So something gives. And what gives is what I think we need to think about, that workload models I have to recognize that. And be honest, is someone just going to go, look, I don't have time to upgrade my PowerPoint slides. I'm just going to use ChatGPT. I see that students cheating, but the new process is I've got to fill out 50 forms and attend meetings. I don't have 10 hours spare, so I'm just going to let it go. So what is going to happen as the money when we have pressures on the staff? And is it going to be, I know that student needs help, but I'm only now able to teach 20 to 75% of the class effectively. But that's what the system wants me to do, so that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really important set of points there, Paul. I think
I don't have an answer, really.
Well, it brings us back to that conversation around funding and, whether or not, obviously, very live discussion for us, have we as a sector become over reliant on the, gorgeous international student revenue, but also, we've kind of been forced into that corner a bit by government funding, which has made it increasingly
But what's
challenging.
wrong with it? What's wrong with international students? Nobody tells BHP or any of the mining companies, please stop exporting steel, or a car manufacturer, please stop making too many cars. Somehow it's bad if we have students learning and taking away soft power. It's just stupid to trash the biggest economy in the country that doesn't dig something out of the ground.
Fully agree with you, Paul. And, Jason Clare, when he was launching the Accord, committed to rebuilding the international education sector with us. Well, that's one thing they haven't really delivered on. So look, let's take a bit of a pivot to another. We've got some questions and thoughts coming in now. So we'll take a bit of a pivot, if that's okay, to a different topic or a different way of approaching the topic. Because I think, a really interesting challenge thrown out to us from Brett Shipton in the chats. So Brett says, I love the idea of empowering students, but many are withdrawing from engagement in class and online. Learning is about getting out of your comfort zone, particularly to engage with your peers in learning situations. What are some ideas about improving student engagement while respecting their choice and how they might engage? How might this fit with reimagining higher education? And that's a really important question, I think, because going back to my point earlier, right, data versus responding to the individual, a lot of the move that many universities are making towards more online delivery is responding to student demand. And the student demand is being shaped by the context in which students find themselves, often with more caring responsibilities, more need to work, which means that online learning becomes more attractive to them. But we also know from the data that online learning has higher attrition rates, worse progress rates, lower student satisfaction rates. So when we're thinking about these issues around universal design, bringing students in, meeting students at their place of learning, as we called it in our thing, how do we navigate that around the challenges of online learning? Paul, can I throw back to you again on that one, as it does relate to the sort of universal design principles that you opened us with?
So online learning.
Yeah.
Well, the point is students, particularly students with disabilities, COVID was a godsend for so many students who've been asking for online learning. Suddenly COVID came along and they all given the opportunity. The universities saved support. Things that were impossible suddenly became possible and forced on people. Now a lot of students really with different needs really enjoyed it. Now we've pivoted back to online and face-to-face, and I prefer a lot more face-to-face, but the point is there's a lot of students that benefited from a different learning style, but we can't do both because of finances. So I mean that's just one point I think is really an expectation. I talked earlier about expectation. I just want to say that one is an expectation which I think you'll see pop up in the ombudsman, because that's one, students have seen it can work and now want it to work for them.
Thanks, Paul. Do any of our other panelists have things to add, Maria, Sarah, on that, the role of online in?
Probably for me, it's actually an experience I've too, because someone who still teaches, is in the classroom and sitting there doing online learning to a screen full of blank screens with potentially the names of the students, although you're never quite sure what name they put on there. And I think for me, look, it's the $1 million question. I don't have a solution to it in terms of ways that we can meet students the needs they want, but then also encourage this high engagement. One of the things I noted many years ago was that I think universities have to be careful in not over-promising and under-delivering with regards to different methods. There's lots of, I'm a marketing, my background's in marketing. So, there's a lot of sometimes this overstatement of these, interactive classrooms and activities, when often what happens is by week 3, those things start to become a bit boring for some students if you're using the same tools and techniques as they go around. And I think that's always been something that's out there. For me, my observation of the last 20 or so years has been that we're at a really interesting point in time, because a lot of dirty laundry about the sector is being aired publicly. So the Accord brought a lot of that to the surface, but then also we're seeing on, panel discussions and people speaking out about, well, what's the value that I'm getting, and will this lead to the job opportunities and the social mobility that I've been promised? And so I think on one hand, while we want to celebrate what we're doing, we have to do it in light of that environment, that we've got skeptical potential students out there and parents of students that are saying, oh, I'm reading all of this stuff, but what should I do? Is this the right thing? And we can never underestimate that group shift or group think, where people start to think that that's the norm. And I must say, in all the years I've been in higher ed, I've never seen so many sort of public statements about what's the point, purpose, and will higher education deliver on its promises in time. So like Sarah said, we're at a key inflection point. I certainly don't have an answer about encouraging engagement, and because I'm old school, I probably move towards that approach of requiring students to, I don't know, turn their if they can turn their cameras on to say hello at the beginning of an online class is quite a helpful thing. I just know what I see in the hallways is the impact that it has on us as teachers, as educators, when we've done a 2-hour workshop to a bunch of blank screens and ask questions to which we get no response. And my concern is that that's sort of affecting us in terms of how we deliver and our enthusiasm and excitement for delivery as well. And I only talk from a personal experience. A few years ago, I did a Cert 4. I wanted to learn about the United Nations, and I thought I'll just do this Cert 4. And when I did it, we were actually required to have our screens on and to be present for the full time. Now, I know that goes against other policies and approaches and things like that, but it did lead to a good cohort being formed across the country, and it did also, for me, it made it a much more enriching experience. And we did have a few people who had their cameras off and watched the recordings, but for the most part, people were able to participate in it. So I know that's a controversial thing, but this is a provocation panel, so I throw it out there. But in short, no answer, but I think we should always be conscious of what's being written about the sector in the public sphere, because it does shape the parents' and students' views and decision making.
Graham, if I could just come in very quickly just on the online aspect. What happened in Canberra over the last 15 years is a real appetite and capacity within the Department of Education to analyse the data. So while online has been an absolute, as Paul said, a godsend for certain students, it's hard to escape from the data analyst point of view that does show worse outcomes for students who are studying in particular part-time and online. Now, some might say, oh my God, isn't that terrible? I'm an optimist. I say this is the opportunity for us as regional universities, as both leaders, but also as staff and academics, to actually seize the opportunity to identify the issues around why and put forward proactive suggestions. And what I've seen in Canberra, and this goes hand in hand with what Marie was just saying about that massification of higher education, where you now have more people than ever before going to university, and the expectations therefore change. When university was an elite product for a select few of the population, it was less of an issue. As you see more and more people go to university, the expectations of those, let's call them consumers, if you will, or students, changes. And that's where we get into an issue here now, where the mindset of a university necessarily hasn't evolved and changed to meet those expectations. We are still beacons of knowledge, right? We are still beacons of knowledge in an applied sense, but also in a theoretical sense. But it's the question of, is that the right expectation for students who want to come study at universities, and that they are primarily funded by the government? And as the government is your primary funder, there is some uncomfortable questions and discussions that need to occur around what those expectations are. So when we think about online, absolutely will do wonders to improve attainment for everyone, not just those in metropolitan, but those in the bush, those in the regions. But there are challenges that we now need to look at ourselves and say, what are we doing? How can we do it differently? How can we drive that curve of improvement and then champion it in Canberra? Because whilst people say government hates universities, they just cut. I can tell you now, there's not a single public servant or politician that I speak with that doesn't want universities to succeed in delivering. The challenge is they hear from their voters, the electorate, that universities are coming up short. So this is an opportunity and a challenge for us going forward, I think, to really define what our role is, how we do it, and be open and brave and bold in putting forward solutions.
Can I just say on that policy, the data, if you have 100 students, say, and none of them would have gone to university unless there was an online offering. So there's 100 students wouldn't have gone. If 40 of those students drop out, even if 60, or even if 70, that's still 30 students that we've given a completed education to who otherwise would not have done a course. And I think that sometimes we miss that sometimes when you deal with really complicated students in complicated ways, you get less outcomes than if you had a child from a very happy, wealthy family in the city who's able to be there in person. But not everyone has parents who have Mercedes-Benzes and Maseratis.
So I agree with you, Paul, in one sense, you know, that and a couple of our commentators have made the same observation that, you know, and it going to the earlier point, you know, for online provides opportunities for students, particularly often from equity cohorts who would not otherwise have the opportunity to study. But the problem for me is first of all, you know, that's if let's say we're taking, I think it's about 40% completion rate in online across the sector. So that means we are funding for 60% who don't complete. So, you know, I can already tell you that's not a very cost-effective way of funding. But also that 60% walk away with a HECS debt and nothing for it. So even if they don't complete, that 60% still, they might not accumulate the full HECS debt, but they've still accumulated a HECS debt. So I agree that online, we shouldn't be looking at those online attrition rates, online retention rates, and saying, you know, that's terrible, we need to stop online, because it's offering an opportunity. It goes very much to your starting point, you know, how do we design for everyone? Online has to be part of that. But I also think we don't do it well, which is kind of the way that you know, the point that I think both Alex and Maria were making, that we need to work out how we can do this in a way that's more engaging and more, you know, my colleagues will know I always come back to the budget, more cost effective for the university and for students. Sarah, you're going to tell us how to do that.
I'm unable to find the hand up gesture on my Zoom, so I had to go with the mechanical. I want to come back to your point, but I also just want to go back to Brett's point, which is around this concept of engagement, because I'm really interested in this. It's something that I've been researching with colleagues in the UK. You know, because universities have very clearly defined ideas of about what engagement is. It's measured, it's part of the, you know, the student experience survey. But, you know, if you ask students what engagement is, they have a very different perspective of what engagement means to them. And the reality is that we have really diverse students and they are going to engage in really diverse ways. So I think we've got to be really careful about how we define what engagement is. To your point, Graham, I mean, I think the Productivity Commission had one of their recommendations in 2023 is we've got to get much better at giving low cost and early exits from university, because there are always going to be learners that, you know, will not will come to university intending to do a degree, but actually, you know, find that that is not really for them. So they need to be able to exit early. It needs to be orderly. There needs to be a national system of RPL that recognizes not only their qualifications, but also their work experience, their lived experience. I mean, these are all things that we know have to shift, because universities are going to have to become more than just about that 3-4 year degree progression. You know, full-time, obviously part-time is slightly longer. Our learners are increasingly going to dip in and out of learning throughout their lives. And again, I sort of agree with Alec. I think that as a regional university, we don't have to dismantle as much as the Group of Eights do around this. There's a lot of tradition around Group of Eights and what they do and how they operate. I think regional universities are far more agile. And going back to what I was saying in my little spiel at the beginning, partnerships and collaborations are going to be really key in this as well. And that's partnerships that cross over, you know, the regional university centres, for example, community colleges, TAFE, vet providers, libraries. All of these are going to be places that we can partner with sort of to fill in learning, so that we don't just do that linear degree progression.
Thanks, Sarah. So look, this is really evolving into a really interesting discussion, I think, and I'm going to add an extra overlay by responding to or putting across a couple of related questions that have come up in the chat. So now let's think about the kind of the governance overlay and what the governance of what governance of universities means for that. So a couple of related questions that I'll ask the panel to respond to. First of all, Riley asks, the University Accord also highlighted the need for governance changes. How can such changes to uni governance structures help learning and teaching in our regional universities? And then I think relatedly, but perhaps dialing down to a very practical question, Caroline Robinson asks, what can we do to radically reimagine the very often slow processes of course development, which is often a governance issue, in universities? Practice is often counter to creativity. So let's go in reverse order of our panelists, and I'm going to throw to Maria first.
I think what I loved about the Accord was it actually brought to the surface some of these, you know, issues around governance that had been, you know, behind closed doors or behind the curtain of universities. And I think one of the best things about reading the Accord was to see that that's a shared experience across the sector, about governance and about things like course development and our processes and becoming much more nimble. I think when we look to like commercial organisations, we can see that they've embraced far more streamlined workflows and structures and processes, and that they also stick with them, so to speak, for a certain period of time. I guess my experience has been new ideas are often have a lifespan of about 2 years before someone introduces another template and another sign off. And then what I see is over the course of, you know, for every sort of 7 years, a new person comes in with a perspective and says, why are we doing this? Let's cut this down. So it's sort of like this long grass, this bureaucracy that just grows and grows and grows. And then in a mega cycle, it gets cut back down to size as a part of it. But I think it's being conscious of that. Often my experience with governance and template making has been that they're often in response to, you know, 1 or 2 people doing something out of the ordinary that's then resulted in an entire new process being implemented. For me, it probably goes back to what do we have to report on, what are our compliance requirements with TEXA, and start with that and don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. On the ground, as what I hear from my fellow academics in the space is a lack of trust, of judgment, of academics, which is leading to more sort of requirements to validate, prove, get sign off on ideas, and equally being so busy with the core business that it takes them away from core business to even identify new courses or course development. One of the things with course development, being a marketer, is maybe we should actually ask the market a bit more about what they want. Sometimes course development becomes a very internal approach or perspective, is about individuals' ideas and thoughts without actually looking to it. Just the government does actually release multiple spreadsheets. I was looking at a few yesterday on where there are actually labour force shortages and what they'll be in the next 5 to 10 years. So the predictions, the data's already there. So sometimes perhaps making those processes or drawing from that existing data that's available can be quite helpful going forward. But yeah, let's maybe fewer templates or new templates. That would be helpful.
Thanks, Maria. I mean, I agree with you in one sense, and we're going through this process at the moment, really looking at labour market needs, particularly in the regional areas that we serve. But some of the concerns I have often around that is, first of all, we might be able to identify labour market needs, but do students understand what that means in terms of the potential students, in terms of where the jobs are, what they might need to study in order to get those jobs. And the second point, I sometimes wonder, worry, particularly in the Australian context, where we have Jobs and Skills Australia and the Productivity Commission and all of these kinds of things. And I sometimes look at Australia and think, we're veering towards a planned economy here. And when you look at the proposals around, the way the managed growth targets will work, for instance, the government will know exactly how many students will be needed in different areas. And if you're an equity student, you'll get a place, but it might not be in the university you want and things like that. And I worry sometimes, that we are, as a country, we kind of overestimate our ability collectively as universities and government to know what's coming down the track, know what the right skills will be, and fund appropriately for it. So I'm kind of a little bit more, well, maybe we just need the students. Maybe it's just, again, asking students what they want to do, and students kind of dovetailing back to the points that Sarah made earlier, and that a couple of us talked to about moving back from the purely socioeconomic functionality of universities to that more sort of holistic educative vision. Any of our other panelists want to sort of comment on that issue and university governance more generally? Paul?
I would agree with you. I can't talk about governance. I work way outside of the university sector there, but I would note that it was reported in the press overnight that in the coming days, Minister Jason Clare will announce the first National Expert Governance Council. Their exact remit was not covered in the article, but that will be an interesting development if that comes about, and we'll see how that interacts with the higher education system more broadly. But I think that there is a point here about it's impossible to have a planned university system in the way that some of the ideas that first came out of the Accord was imagining. It's great when you pick a winner, but more times, often than not, you don't pick a winner. And it's only in hindsight, 10 years later, when you go, look, we picked that one winner, and you just conveniently mention all the times that you were wrong. Jobs and Skills Australia have a vital role to play here. One of the key things which we've struggled with throughout the Accord process is the lack of data that is available and the lack of longitudinal studies that are done. So the simple question of where does the regional workforce come from is still largely unanswered. Now, Jobs and Skills Australia say they're going to do some work on this. We remain optimistic that that will be the case. But even answering key questions like that, and it's a question I think that we can throw back to you as university experts. Where do your teachers go? Where do your nurses that you are educating go post-graduation? And how are you demonstrating that you are filling those skills gaps and needs with empirical data, not just an anecdotal survey of we spoke to 5 graduates and they're doing great things, but an actual consistent time series of data here to demonstrate the value of what regional universities are delivering. That would be a magical first step in demonstrating that, but also then in cementing the value proposition of regional universities to government, to your students, because you actually have an empirical story to tell.
Can I weigh in?
Paul?
Well, one really big issue is I can't do a linkage grant with Charles Sturt University as a linkage partner because you're a university. So when I'm an academic, I'm encouraged to go to Qantas and to companies and not to go to my own sector. And I find it a really strange scenario that the major research and innovation experts in the country don't get recognized if we research, well, not supported the same, if we research on higher education as if we research, say, on primary school or on mining. And I think that's a real problem we could address. And if also one other thing about governance, often we said, oh, the private sector do this, the private sector do that. And I think, yes, but the private sector had WorldCom, Enron, HIH, OneTel, and created thalidomide and asbestos. So good and bad, right? So I think we need to be really cautious about becoming too corporate. But and then the final point I want to make is around the higher education standards, framework. We have to respond to that. And we can carve back a bit, I think, and get more focused and enable innovation within that. But remember, we also are bound by work health and safety laws, corporations acts, privacy laws, anti-discrimination laws, multiple of them, then reg codes within different in disciplines. So if you want to become a lawyer, a doctor, a nurse, an occupational therapist, there's frameworks around that. And so we're such a highly regulated sector. I don't think I'd be surprised if I went to a nuclear power station and looked around. I wonder if they've got less regulation than someone who's doing a BA.
Yeah. I think we are very heavily regulated. I saw it nicely expressed once recently that over the past 10 years, I think it is, that the Higher Education Support Act has grown from 200 pages to 600 pages. And that to me, it's just a little nice quantification of the amount of regulation and bureaucracy that we live under. Look, we are out of time for what's been a really interesting and wide-ranging chat. Discussion. So I'd like to say thank you again to Professor Paul Harpur, Professor Sarah O'Shea, Alec Webb, and Professor Maria Raciti for their contributions and what I hope has been, and given the number of claps and hearts and celebrations appearing up on the screen, obviously been a well-received stimulation for the rest of our discussions over the next couple of days. So thank you all very much and look forward to seeing how many of these questions and challenges we can answer over the next couple of days. And Kushala, you're going to tell us about that now.
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Paul, Sarah, Alec, and Maria, for sharing your reflections with us, sharing your provocations with us. It has been an incredible start to the conference. Graham, thank you for chairing the conversation and drawing on the questions that our audience has shared with us as well. Thank you to our audience for your engagement in this session and for your questions, for your reflections, for your acknowledgement, and I think celebration of the points that our panelists have made. I myself have, you've set the bar high, you've really set the tone for this conference. And so we're very incredibly grateful for you, your time, your expertise. And also I think that that culture of care and generosity that I think in this learning and teaching community and within this sector that we demonstrate, that we really walk that talk around that academic generosity. So my job is very simple. Following that is to remind you about the rest of the program and to invite you to stay with us, to engage with the rest of the program. So we've got a short break coming up. We've got about 15 minutes where a short break, and then this will be followed by a range of oral presentations and roundtables. There are 3 streams that you can choose from. Following that, we will also have another session of presentations and then rounding the day off with my favorite part of the day. It's our awards and acknowledgement session where we celebrate once again our learning and teaching community about their achievements and but also the contributions that they make. And I think, you know, it's fair to say after what we've heard this morning, it takes a village to raise a student, but also to really nurture our academics and our professional staff. And the session this afternoon is all about that. It's about celebrating our people. So thank you, everybody, for really setting the tone for the conference. And I wish you all the best for the rest of your day, but please come back in 15 minutes and join in the rest of the program, and we will look forward to seeing you then. And also, please share your feedback with us. You know, our learning and teaching community, we've heard what you've said from last year. We want to hear from you. We take your feedback seriously, and we always try to improve the CSEdX experience. So please take a moment to fill out survey form. We want to hear what you think about this panel presentation, obviously, but also the conference itself. And we'll reward you with lunch on us. So please take an opportunity and moment to do that as well. But it's been a fantastic start. And thank you, Janelle, and to Professor Renée Leon as well for just opening this conference in a beautiful way. Thank you all, and see you soon.
Thank you.